Hello everybody, thank you for having me back. Today's topic is going to be the ABCs of trust. My name is Kim Smith and I'm an estate planning and elder law attorney. I practice solely in this area of law and I'm happy today to speak to you about when a trust is useful, the items that it streamlines, and when it's really not necessary as well. So everyone's heard of trusts, and you're probably all saying, oh, do I need a trust? So and so has a trust. There are many, many, many different types of trusts, okay? And, it's not a one size fits all. It's not that everyone needs a trust or everyone needs the same type of trust. So a trust is an estate planning tool that helps manage assets during your lifetime and transfer assets upon your passing. And there's actually work in between because where we have a revocable trust and you may be the person managing it, if you became incapacitated, you would have a succession plan. You would have a backup trustee that would be able to continue to smoothly run your trusts. So I'm going to talk predominantly about living trusts, grantor living trusts, both revocable and irrevocable. But before I get into that, let's speak a little bit about testamentary trusts, okay? What is the difference between a testamentary trust and a living trust? So a testamentary trust is a trust that's established in your will, okay? So the trust isn't actually created until the death of the individual because it's in their will. So for instance, if I have minor children in my will, I may say if my children are under the age of 25, I don't want them to receive those assets outright because they may go buy a shiny red sports car, or Amazon will be coming to the house every day. So I may put a minor's trust in my will that says if I pass and my children are under the age of 25, their assets shall be held in trust by their aunt, my sister, until they reach the age of 25. And then once they reach that age, those assets will pass outright to them. So this trust isn't set up and funded while I'm alive. This trust is only created if at the time of my death, my children are under the age of 25. If they're 30, 35, 40, then this trust is never established. So this is what is called a testamentary trust. And a lot of things that we're going to talk about that living trusts do can also be accomplished through testamentary trusts, again, which are set up upon the passing of the individual and the probate of the will. But a lot of times trusts are set up to avoid probate, okay? And what is probate? So probate is the process of collecting assets and distributing them upon someone's death. So if you have a will or you don't have a will, the process is when you have an asset, when you die, if you have an asset that doesn't have a joint owner on it, does not have a named beneficiary or transfer of death on it, and is just solely in your name. Say you have a checking account with $100,000 in your name when you pass, that would go through probate because that doesn't have a joint owner in the scenario I gave you. And checking accounts normally do not allow beneficiaries. So that asset would have to be probated or administered through the estate. So what a probate is a petition is drafted, it's filed with the original will and a death certificate with the court, requesting that the individual gets appointed as the executor. So in your will, you may nominate someone as an executor, but they have no authority to act until the court actually appoints them as an executor. And the issue is when you file this petition and file the will, you also have to give notice to those individuals who would have inherited had there not been a will. So for instance, if I disinherit one of my 3 children, they get notice and they get a copy of the will when I pass if I have to probate an asset. If I don't want them to have a notice that I am disinheriting them, I might want a trust, which we will get into shortly. Another reason to not want to, or another example actually, of probate and how it could get tied up is, for instance, I have someone right now who passed away and all her beneficiaries are in Germany. And that's not even the issue. They're named. But the issue is they are not the people who would have inherited had she died without a will. And those are very distant relatives that are going to be very difficult to find. And I will need to find them in order to probate the will. So in that case, she probably should have had a revocable or irrevocable trust. So that's the probate process. And administration is a similar process when someone doesn't have a will. So say I had that $100,000 bank account, checking account with no beneficiary, no joint owner, and I died without a will. Well, then what would happen is someone would file, one of my heirs or beneficiaries would file a petition for administration asking to be appointed to the estate. And that individual may need to be bonded. And the big issue becomes, if I'm married and I expect that everything should go to my spouse, if I don't have a will, my spouse is only entitled to the first $50,000, then 50% of my estate, and the kids get the balance. Where normally, in most planning, not all, but most, for a married couple with children from the same union, they leave everything to their spouse first and then their children. That being said, if there's an asset in their name and they don't have a will, the distribution is different than you would think it would be. Also, you cannot disinherit a spouse in New York State. You can disinherit children, but not a spouse. They're entitled to 1/3 of the estate, no matter what the will says. So if I say I leave nothing to my husband, everything to my kids, he can elect against my estate for 1/3 of the assets. So that's a little bit about probate. So as some of this discussion, you could probably see why we may not want to probate. So utilizing a trust and placing assets, so creating a trust and placing some assets in the trust could avoid the need for probate and should. So let's talk about living trusts. So remember before I had mentioned revocable and irrevocable. Well, I'm going to start the conversation with revocable living trusts. And you'll see people advertising seminars, everyone should have a revocable trust. That wasn't always the case. Post-COVID, it might be the case, and I'll explain a little bit more. So a revocable trust is a document that would appoint the settlor or the grantor. Those are the creators of the trust. So if I'm the individual creating the trust, I'm either called a settlor or a grantor, and then it appoints a trustee. And a trustee is the individual that's going to manage the trust during my lifetime. Then you're going to appoint a successor trustee that would manage the trust or distribute the trust upon my death, or upon my incapacitation, or if I just get to the point I don't want to manage my assets anymore. So those are very core terms: settlor, grantor, trustee. Another term is principal or corpus. Those are the assets that are held by the trust. And then income, okay? And income is simply income, anything generated by the trust. So basically, any type of asset that you may own can be owned or held by a trust. So in order to put an asset in the trust, it's very much the same way you acquire an asset. So say you wanted to put a house in a trust. When you purchase a house, what do you get? You get a deed, and the deed is titled in your name. Well, in this case, if you wanted the trust to hold your property, your real property, you would put the deed from your name into your name as trustee of your trust if you're the trustee, but it would go into the name of your trust. If you have a bank account, instead of it being in your name, it would be in the name of your trust or your name as the trustee if you're the trust. So with revocable trusts, normally, because they're revocable, they're not really creditor protection trusts, but they're really for the purpose of managing your assets during your lifetime, managing your assets if you became incapacitated, and distributing your assets without the need for probate when you're gone. So why would you want to do that? Well, one, it does save costs, okay, so it saves costs on the probate process and the legal fees associated when someone passes. But quite frankly, the cost of setting up a trust is normally could exceed the price of setting up a will, so you are kind of paying for it on the front end versus on the back end. But the real important thing is avoiding probate in certain cases. So when would you want to avoid probate? Well, say I'm a snowbird and I own property here and I own property in Florida, okay? Anywhere I own dirt, I have to probate the will. So if I'm married, my husband dies first, and we owned property in New York and in Florida, and now I pass, guess what? My kids need to file a probate proceeding in New York and in Florida and any other state that I own property. Now, pre-COVID, New York was not a difficult place to probate an estate, but Florida's always been difficult. You have to publish for creditors. There's a lot of rules and hurdles to go over in Florida. So for many people that have property in multiple states, a revocable trust is definitely the course to go, because if they retitle their deeds into their revocable trust, when they're gone, the successor trustee has the power, without being appointed by the court, can continue to manage the property and can sell the property or transfer the property without court intervention. Okay, so it makes tremendous sense. Another example of when you might want to avoid probate was in a scenario I gave you a way back. Say I was going to disinherit one of my children or one of my heirs at laws that would have inherited had I not had a will. Because even if I have a will and I leave them out of the will, because they would have inherited had I not had a will, they're entitled to notice and a copy of my will. So say I wanted to disinherit someone and I felt it was none of their business. By simply having the assets in the trust, guess what? They're not entitled to notice when I pass. The trustee has the ability to pay my debts, collect my assets, manage my assets, and distribute them to the people I've named in that trust, with no notice to anyone else that may have been entitled had I not had a will, or my heirs at law, for lack of a better explanation. That's another time that I would want a revocable trust. What if I had a disabled beneficiary? When you have a disabled child or a disabled beneficiary and you probate a will, the court will appoint what's called a guardian ad litem, a GAL, to protect the interest of that disabled individual. So they would do a report, they speak with everyone, and then they submit a report to the court, and if everything's okay, then the court will appoint the executor. It's an extra layer, it adds time, and it adds expense to the estate. So if I had a disabled beneficiary, someone I wanted to leave assets to, I would recommend having a trust, because then a guardian ad litem is not appointed. So those are some examples of when you would want a revocable trust. A lot of times in my elder law practice, we may do Medicaid planning or Medicaid application to get home care or nursing home care for a spouse of an individual, and we don't want there to be a probate upon the healthy spouse's death, because if their assets go through probate court, or an executor needs to be appointed, Medicaid can come back as a creditor and look to claim from the healthy spouse's estate, even if they did a spousal refusal. So a lot of times if we have done Medicaid for an ill spouse, either in the community or a nursing home, we will absolutely put the healthy spouse's house or what have you into some sort of trust, whether it be revocable or irrevocable trust, so that when they pass, it avoids probate and avoids recovery for purposes of Medicaid. So I only have a total of a half hour, and I'm already almost halfway through. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about irrevocable trusts in the world of elder law and Medicaid, nursing home, long-term care planning, since I kind of segued into it. So an irrevocable trust is a little different than a revocable, well, actually a lot different than a revocable trust in that the settlor or the grantor, the creator, is the same, myself or whomever, but the trustee I cannot be the trustee of my irrevocable trust, nor can my spouse. It has to be a third party. And that third party can be a child, a grandchild, niece, friend, accountant, whoever you want to appoint, but it cannot be your spouse and it cannot be yourself. And the reason for this is an irrevocable trust is in the one I'm speaking about right now, it's also called a Medicaid trust, an income only trust. That is a trust, it's a creditor protection trust, so it protects assets for long-term care planning. And what it does is when you put assets in the trust after a certain amount of time that passes, they are kind of outside of your estate for purposes of eligibility for long-term care services through Medicaid. So that's when predominantly we use irrevocable trusts. There are also irrevocable trusts, which I'm probably not going to have time to get into, but in estate planning, where you can transfer assets during your lifetime into these trusts for your heirs, beneficiaries, or kids to pull them out of your estate for estate tax purposes. And that is probably going to be a topic I'll speak about at a later time because rumor has it with the new administration that they will be reducing, and plus even the old numbers are supposed to sunset anyway in the next couple of years, but that we may see a reduction in the current exemption, which exceeds $11 million per person right now for federal tax, state tax, and it's almost $6 million per person for New York State to avoid estate tax. So the numbers are really, really high, and I anticipate them coming down somewhat in the future. I don't know if they'll ever go back to our 1 million or 3 million numbers, but you know, rumor has it that we will see them come back. So we may utilize trusts. There's QPERTs and slats, and there's all kinds of fancy stuff that we can utilize to save on some estate taxes up the road. But for today, I'm going to just focus on the revocable trust and the Medicaid income only trust. So you would say, well, why would I want to create a trust, put assets in it, and not be able to manage them, right? Well, you would never put all your eggs in this basket, in one basket. So a lot of times in my planning, what we will do is we will definitely put a house in an irrevocable trust on Long Island, especially right now. The houses are quite a large part of an individual's estate. And if we create an irrevocable trust and we put a house into the irrevocable trust, we still get our exemptions on the house. So if you get STAR or a veteran's exemption, you're still entitled to it. We still have the right to live there for our lifetime. Our kids can't throw us out. If we want to sell the house, they need to sell the house. We still have to pay the taxes. We still have to maintain the property. If we sell the house, we still get our capital gain exemption as if it was in our name. And upon our death, if the house passes to the kids, we get a step up in cost basis currently. That may also change. So nothing really changes when you put a house in an irrevocable trust. It takes 60 months to protect it for purposes of nursing home care. So if you have a house in a irrevocable trust for 60 months or more, it is 100% protected if you require long-term care in a nursing home in the future. And we used to have no look back for home care Medicaid services, but we now have a 30-month look back that they're going to roll in, so it's not quite 30 months yet. It'll go 1 month at a time, but that's for home care. So once the house eventually is in there for 30 months, it's protected if you require long-term care at home. So it is a great tool to protect the house because nothing changes for me. Nothing would, you know, my kids can't throw me out, like I said. The other thing is you can change the beneficiaries of that trust at any time, and you can change the trustees. Again, it can't be yourself, it can't be your spouse. But say I have my New York house in an irrevocable trust, and I decide I want to move to Florida. So I want to sell my house, and I'm going to need the trustee to sign the paperwork, and I want to then, the money from the sale of my New York house will go back into my trust, and I want to purchase a Florida property with my trust. And my daughter says, no way, you're not moving to Florida. I'm not signing off. I'm not agreeing to this. Well, I can remove her as the trustee. So I'll talk to my son and say, are you okay with this? He says, yes. I say, all right, I'm removing, my daughter as the trustee, and I'm appointing my son, and then I can go about my business and sell my property. Or I could just say to her, if you don't sign off on the paperwork, I'm going to remove you as a beneficiary. I have that dangling carrot. So it is a very flexible tool, and you can revoke an irrevocable trust. So it sounds crazy, but in that same scenario, say I sold my New York property for $750,000, and I bought a Florida property for $500,000, and now my trust holds the $250,000 left from my New York property and my $500,000 Florida property, and I want that money, right? I want to decorate, I want to travel the world, whatever I want to do. Well, I can execute what's called a partial revocation of that trust. I need my beneficiaries to sign off and my trustees, and again, if they don't, I can remove them, and then I can simply take the money out that way. You have to take it out properly. I can't just pull the money out without procedurally doing that, because if I do, it will expose the whole trust for purposes of long-term care services in the future. It will not destroy it for purposes of avoiding probate, but again, with an irrevocable trust, we're normally doing it to protect the asset for long-term care benefits. The other thing is, once we put assets in an irrevocable trust, so say someone puts a house in now, and 4 years later they decide they want to add an annuity to that trust, I would not add that annuity to that first irrevocable trust. I would create a second one, because if I do and I'm not through the 5-year look back, I've now just started that penalty for the house over again. Also, even if I was at year 6, there is some case law that says that Medicaid could say that by adding an asset even after the 5 years has expired, kind of reopens the trust, and I would not want to re-expose the house that was already protected. So normally we would do a second trust. Annuities that you're not looking to draw off of is another item we normally put into irrevocable trusts, because if you or your spouse goes on Medicaid or needs care, Medicaid makes you name them as the second beneficiary on the annuity after the spouse. So either people liquidate annuities when that happens, or a good idea is to put them in an irrevocable trust. Another asset we often put in a trust is a life insurance policy that has a very big cash value. There's life insurance policies that have been around many, many years that may have a $70,000, $80,000 cash value. It's not money you're ever going to use, but it accumulates and it's an asset in your name. So often we'll put life insurance policies with big cash values into Medicaid trusts also. So the reason why I said we would never put all our eggs in one basket is any assets you put in an irrevocable trust other than the house, you're only entitled to the income it generates. You're not allowed to pull out the principal. So, sometimes we have the kids come in with the parents and they want to put every last dime into the irrevocable trust to protect their inheritance. And I'll say to the parents, no, think about what you want to leave out. Definitely put the house in, put life insurance. If you have an annuity that you're not touching and you don't foresee touching, and if you need to up the road, we can pull it out. Those assets go in, but leave out, an amount of money that makes you comfortable, that you can live off of, because, hopefully it'll never happen. That maybe you'll never need long-term care, and you don't want to live with your hands tied your whole life. So there has to be some given, to protect a portion's great, to protect the whole, to put everything in there does not make sense. Obviously, long-term care insurance is the best route to go. I don't sell insurance, but it does pay for your care for X amount of time and years. The problem right now is there's less and less providers of long-term care, insurance companies that sell it on Long Island. And post-COVID, if you've had COVID, they're really afraid of some long-term effects of it, so you may not be insurable. There are some policies now that are hybrids, so you can buy a life insurance policy and you can actually utilize a portion of the death benefit for home care type benefits or assistance. So those are things to look into. There are some other trusts, and I'm down to 5 minutes, but real important, special needs trusts. Those are trusts that can be created in a will or can be created as a standalone living trust, and they're for disabled individuals. So often in my wills, I'll put a trigger provision that says if any beneficiary that stands to inherit in an estate is disabled at the time that they're going to inherit, that it goes into a testamentary trust created in the will for them and gets held for them and will not bump them off their government benefits. So special needs trusts are created for those so that disabled individuals can get an inheritance without affecting their benefits. The money's segregated for them. There's a trustee appointed for them. It can be created during their lifetime. It can be created in someone's will, but we utilize them a lot. There's two types of special needs trust. The first is a first-party trust, and the second is a third-party trust. Third-party trust is like I described to you. If I leave assets to someone that's disabled, it's my money that's funding their trust, third-party monies. It can be used for anything they need, and when they pass, it goes to my beneficiaries or however I direct it. A first-party trust is just what it says. It's established with that disabled beneficiary's assets, meaning if I didn't provide for my disabled child in my will with a third-party trust and I left an inheritance and they became disabled and I never updated my will and they inherited and they were under 65, they're allowed to create a first-party trust, throw the assets in, and maintain their government eligibility. But because they receive that money in their hand, there's a payback provision to Medicaid or whatever government entity provided their services upon their death. So really important if there's a disabled beneficiary to utilize a third party rather than a first party trust. And if someone has both, you're going to want to spend the money in the first party trust before the third party trust, because that one will have recovery first party and the third party won't. Again, there are other trusts, Cupid or Qualified Personal Residence Trust, which are houses transferred for the purposes of getting them out of the estate for tax purposes. There are trusts called ILETs, which used to be very popular, haven't been so much as of more recently with the exemptions raised so high, but they're definitely, I see them coming back. So an ILET is an insurance trust. And what happens is you can set up the trust, buy life insurance with the trust, and as long as it's maintained in that trust for 2 years, the life insurance proceeds are out of your estate for estate tax purposes. So what that means is if I am worth about $12 million, right, and the federal exemption's 11 million, say it's 11 million. And I now have a life insurance policy of $2 million. When I die, my estate now is worth, what did I say, it was 12, so now it's worth 14 million because my life insurance is part of my estate that got paid out. So now I'm going to be paying taxes on 3 million over 11 million. Well, instead, if I had purchased this or placed this life insurance policy of 2 million into an ILET, an insurance trust, that 2 million would not be in my estate for estate tax purposes. So when I died and I was worth 12 million plus the 2 million insurance policy, I'm only $1 million over the exemption, so there'll be tax on that million, but that 2 million didn't raise my tax liability by adding it into my estate, and that money can be used to offset the cost of my estate taxes. So those are insurance trusts. There's procedurally things that have to be done to make them work, but that's a topic for another day. I am very happy to speak with you tonight. I thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, and I hope to continue and bring you some more topics in the estate planning and elder law world. Thank you. Stay safe and be healthy. Bye-bye.